I've got some paints out, and what we're going to do is just make a little small study using colour that's again just going to be about getting the composition correct and just seeing what colours are going to work together and what's going to work well. You can use old boards for stuff like this. It's only about getting something down very quickly. It's not about doing a smaller finished painting. It's just about getting the basics down in paint. When we come to do the main picture, we'll do all the colour matching and get everything spot on. But for this is just a loose idea, almost an abstract picture. So I'm just working from a photograph I took when we were on the common. I've got my sketches and my sketchbooks here as well. And I'm just going to look at that picture and just with a nice big brush, just going to try and get down this sky, which was fairly pale. So just going to give the old canvas a spray, get a bit of moisture on there, and just get that covered up nice and quick. With a layer of white paint. And just want to think about where the horizon line is going to go. So just with a smaller brush, I will just pop a suggestion of that in. I'm just looking at where it's running on my photograph there. So just down here, and then it raises a bit, doesn't it, where the cathedral is. So just putting in a suggestion of that, really, just something to work from. Well, these canvas boards are good. You see how physical I'm being with this. You need something sturdy like this that's not going to go anywhere when you're doing this kind of aggressive brushwork. So something that's going to take a bit of punishment. This is only a loose study, so you can afford to be quite free with your brush strokes. Okay, and then just going to spray that again. And just introduce a bit of blue into that. So just working straight onto that wet layer of white there. And I'm just blending some phthalo blue into that. Nice big marks. This is not about detail, it's about colour and composition. So just very loosely, very quickly, and just thinking about the sort of overall shapes. So I'm just thinking, get some nice diagonal strokes in the sky there, working up. It's a bit darker in the top, so get another brush now. So going to put in this sort of middle area, which is where the city was. It's going to be a case of using similar colours to what we've used in the sky. So I'm just mixing some titanium white, a touch of phthalo blue and some burnt umber, and that's going to give us a sort of steely pale grey, and I'm just going to work that into the middle section of the painting where the city was, just with a brush. Big brush marks. You'll see I've gone over the lines into the sky. That's not the end of the world, that doesn't matter at all. It's only a quick study, so keep it fluid, don't be too precious. Alright, what we were looking at in our sketchbook was this darker area in the foreground where the foliage was. So I'm just going to put a suggestion of that in as well, so we've got an idea of where our darks and lights are going to be. So just going to get a good dollop of burnt umber on my brush and just put in the suggestion of that dark bush that was in the foreground there. So we've darkened that area of the picture, so we've got the changing contrast between our sort of bright blue sky, our middle ground, which is going to be in the distance, obviously, that's where the city is, and then this dark area of foliage in the foreground. So we get layers of colour going backwards and receding, which will draw your eye into the picture. Just gonna use a thinner brush and put some lines in that are gonna separate where the common was and where the city was. So just gonna use my brush to separate those two areas. And then gonna start to break this middle area up with a few quick marks, which will stop it looking too flat. And we want to obviously create the impression that there's loads of buildings and things in the city. We're not going to paint them all individually. So what we need to do is use paint and use colour to suggest that they're there. Got the nice sort of pale green colour where the foliage was in the foreground of the common, so I'm going to just put a suggestion of that in. Spraying the board as I go. I want to keep the paint moving, I want to keep it loose, so I want to have a nice smooth surface to work on. So by spraying constantly, I'm keeping the paint moist, and I'll stick some brown on my brush, I think, make that a bit darker just along in the foreground there. So we'll put the cathedral in now. It's only going to be a mark to suggest it. Any sort of detail work we'll do in the finished painting, but I just want to map it in on my horizon line so I know roughly where it's going to go. So just with a smaller brush, I'm going to grab some Naples yellow and a bit of burnt umber, I think. And just to sort of keep my paint flow, I'm just going to spray the end of my brush there so that's nice and loose. Just some quick marks to suggest where that's going to go. And although it's a smaller brush, it's not the finest brush in the world, so it's not about getting tiny amounts of detail, it's just about getting the general impression. We'll break this horizon line up, so a few marks along the top will stop that looking too strong. So just this kind of pale browny grey colour is just giving that sense of distance where the cathedral's standing in front of the sky there, and just along this horizon line, that's just softening everything, knocking it back and giving you a sense of perspective and depth. So just using these soft grey colours across this middle ground here. Now it's quite dark along the top of the ridge, so we'll darken that area up as well. So this is just about looking at your source material, looking at the photos and the sketches and picking out very basic elements. So I'm just looking the areas that are dark, those that are light, and just using my paint just to represent those very quickly. My dark marks are just breaking up the middle ground now. This is going back to what I was saying about not wanting to describe every last bit of detail in the city here, because that would take us forever. So what we're going to do is just vary the tone, vary the colour in this middle ground, and that will just trick the eye into thinking there's stuff there. I'll lighten it up a bit, add in some Naples yellow, start to put in some more marks that again will break it up. Working with a limited palette is quite useful for this, because what you can find is that the more colours you've got, the more muddy things become, and the more tempted you are to throw every colour on straight from the off. So with having just a few colours on my palette and varying the amount of white or brown I add to them, I can play around with the tone, and that allows me to get these kind of distant tones and the sense of the cathedral being in the distance, this middle area sort of being subdued. I don't want it to be too vibrant or too garish at this point in time. Bit of highlight here, I think, so give that a spray. And I'll just drag some colour across there, just to give the impression of light on the foreground here. So just a line of Naples yellow on the end of my brush that's just, again, helping to make everything recede. So we've got some nice bright lights here, this middle ground going back, and then the blue in the sky. Like I was saying about getting that sense of depth in the picture, just using a smaller brush, you can just go in and a few little marks here to give the impression of trees and things on the common. Again, building up a sense of distance, a sense of perspective, and it just makes the whole picture look a lot more believable. So if you just put a few dabs of your brush, that will give you a sense of depth in the picture. Right, so I'm just going to check that against my photo, check it against my sketches, see if I'm happy with the overall composition and the sort of range of colours that we're going to be using in the final painting. So just looking through there. Just as a general starting point, before we move on to the final picture, that's going to serve quite nicely. Okay. So that brings us to the end of the first programme. We've got the basics done, we've been to the location, got our sketches, done some drawings, and got this tonal study from which to work. In the next programme, what we're going to do is work all this material into a larger, more finished painting and go through in a bit more detail what I'm doing with the paint, why I'm using certain colours, and how we arrive at the finished painting.